You're listening to WeDeepen Media.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder and CEO of WeDeepen Feminine Weapon, and also a certified professional love coach. If you haven't lately, go to WeDeepen.com, check out all the upcoming social and transformational experiences. You can hit the social calendar. Also, if you scroll down, you'll see some of the highlighted experiences coming up. A few to share with you right now. First off, I'll be at the Wonderland Conference in Miami, Florida, happening November 9th through the 11th. It's a psychedelic longevity mental health conference. I'll be facilitating the Dating Dojo, also the Playful Portal, and the mind-blowing intimacy panel. So come join us, Miami, Florida, November 9th through the 11th. I'll also be bringing the new Love Club there. You're going to hear me talk more about the Love Club shortly. I know I've been teasing it a little bit. When you go to WeDeepen.com, that matchmaking link, and also there's a Love Club link now. It will allow you to apply early for membership and also enter yourself into the WeDeepen matchmaking database. And the Love Club is going to meet at the Wonderland Conference, so come be with us together. Also, my guest today, Kimi Inch, she has a program coming up, the Something More event happening in Austin, Texas, November 19th through the 22nd. We're going to be adding that to the WeDeepen.com calendar. So by the time you listen, it will be there. And Kimi will even share more about that program during this podcast episode. I will also be in New York City. I'm taking a trip to New York. The end of September, I am going to be there at the Tantra Institute, Tantra Lofts, with Guy and our friends there that facilitate Tantra Speed Date. There's Tantra Speed Dates happening all throughout the United States right now. And we're going to be doing some programs while I'm in New York City towards the end of September. So definitely check that out. That will be on the calendar soon as well. If you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, follow, rate it, give it 5 stars. It helps me continue to record it, helps more people find it. And also, you know, why I love sharing with you in this way, what even more excites me is being with you in real life, like coming together. So as you listen to this podcast episode and share it with your friends, we get more people to come be with us in real life. And all those experiences that you see, they are specifically curated for people who want healthy, loving, epic relationships. So if you're currently single or in a coupledom or a polysome, whatever you want to be in, come and join us. I'm here in Austin, Texas. I am at Kimi Inch's private residence, and we're going to dive into a fascinating conversation. So the first time I talked about, we're going to talk a little bit about BDSM and kink and intimacy, spanking. We might get into some spanking. And I first did a podcast on BDSM. It was episode number 30 with Francesca Gentile. It was the healing powers of BDSM. And this was in March of 2022. And we were at the Unleashed Transformational Festival at the time, recording from a tent. And Jorge, who's my co-producer of this podcast, him and I were both in the space with Francesca and were mind blown. Because oftentimes when I'd heard of BDSM in the past, it came with, there was almost like a fear that I had around it. Like it was this unknown world that really didn't make sense. It seemed dark and dreary. And I oftentimes think that that's what allowed, when I mentioned, we hosted the Boundless Lionsgate Pleasure Portal in Austin, Texas a couple weeks ago. And as I was inviting people to that event, some people would say to me, I'm not kinky. That's not for me. And I'm like, you're not kinky? Do you like to role play? Do you like to have fun, and elevate your, I don't know, your sexual connections, and their interest would peak a little bit. And I personally have been discovering more about myself, having more expanded sexual sensual experiences in the discovery of kink. And I've been so, I guess I've been so personally elevating my own consciousness through discovering educators like Kimi, like Francesca, and grateful for their existence. And I can even think of it back in 2014 when TED Talks became popular, and Esther Perel and Brene Brown and Katie Gay and Katie Hendricks and Dr. John Gray. And now to be able to see that there are people who don't look scary, who are actually beautiful and charismatic, and somebody that you would hang out and have dinner with, doing this work. It's opened my mind and expanded. So Kimi, it's so great to be here with you today. Thank you for joining me in this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I think you're so cool. And I loved what you talked about when people are like, I'm not kinky. And I always get really delighted by that sort of response, because I'm like, most of us are kinky as fuck. We're just completely unconscious about it. And I get curious around like, how in your day-to-day life are you kinky without awareness? Like, how do you find ways of being perhaps a masochist? You know, like I always joke, because I like to jump in the cold plunge that's like 40 degrees and sit there for 3 minutes. And I'm like, I'm such a fucking masochist, but I feel so good afterwards, you know. But there's other ways that, you know, we are unconsciously kinky. And the thing that I like to tell people about kink is that kink is a representation of the universal themes within life. So in life, there are themes around love, sex, power, surrender, control. You know, all of these things exist, pain, pleasure in our lives. And in kink, they don't only exist, but they are negotiated and agreed upon and actually played out in real time. So these concepts of power, surrender, pain, pleasure, these universal themes are something that you can create in an erotic sense so that you can have pleasure around it. And if you can have pleasure around it in that setting, you can have pleasure around it anywhere you go. So kinkifying your life is something I'm a big advocate for. And if you're really certain that you're not kinky, I would really invite you to reflect on that, because there's so many things that we tend to be a slave of resistance, a slave of comfort, a slave of, you know, having security. And those are things that, you know, we don't always think about. So I think most of us are pretty fucking kinky at the end of the day, if we were really to be honest with ourselves.
Hands down, the erotic blueprints. I discovered them about a year ago, and it took me a while. Like it took me some time to actually take the quiz. And if you Google erotic blueprint, you can come to Jaya's website, and there's a section you can pay $17 to take the quiz, or you can take one for free. I took the one for free in the beginning of this year, and I was my primary was sensual. And the person I was seeing at the time, I felt as though I was being judged as being sensual, and I wanted to play more in the kink space. And so the erotic blueprints, you know, you'll take the quiz, and you'll be sensual, sexual, shapeshifter, energetic, or kinky. And what I come to discover through them was that actually it's a gateway. That your primary blueprint is a gateway into all of the others. And why I years ago, I became a little disturbed by the love languages. I loved the love languages at first, but then after, you know, playing with that theory, the love language theory for a bit, I was like, wait a minute, I'm all of these. We're all of these. Why are we limiting ourselves by saying it? And they're, again, these are all gateways into discover more about yourself through that experience. Or through that study. So Kimi, you are a somatic therapist, an intimacy coach, a motivational spanker. Your Instagram is fascinating. It's like I can scroll through it in one night and just be with a friend, and I can geek out on all of your content there. It's so entertaining. I love that you even call yourself a sex positive comedian and what's that term?
An edutainer.
Edutainer, yes, an edutainer. And that is truly what you are. You're like a bright light for what is seen as taboo. Totally. And it doesn't even need to be taboo. And it's taboo because it's like the stigma, but everybody is distorted into some way in our own sexuality because our educational curriculums completely neglect the subject. So how did you... Like, I know the story and I'm excited to be able to share the story. How did you get into, because it's been 20 years now of doing this work. How did you get into studying kink and being a kink educator?
Yes. So it's interesting because when people ask me how I became a professional dominatrix, I tell them, it started when I was 10 years old, and they were like, wait, what? And I'm like, hold on a second. When I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of parental supervision, and that's important as part of the story to note because I didn't have a lot of censorship growing up. Like, I was able to watch R-rated movies and adult-themed TV shows, and no one was really there to tell me otherwise. So it wasn't too much of a big deal, and I quite enjoyed watching, violent, sexy kind of movies and shows. But this one day, I was watching a movie called Basic Instinct, and my mom happened to be home, and she sat down next to me as the movie was already playing. And this was actually one of my favorite movies. And I remember watching it over and over and over again, wishing I was Sharon Stone, who, by the way, is how I sort of basically created my mistress persona after that character. So back to the story, I'm watching Basic Instinct, and the scene in the movie where Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone are having violently sexual interaction. She's tying him up and they're slapping each other and biting each other. And my mom turns to me in that moment and says, "You should not be watching this." And she didn't turn it off and nothing. I kept watching the movie, went right back to it. But I remember in that moment, I had such a visceral bodily reaction to that. I remember my heart started racing. My pits started sweating. I started feeling my genitals tingling. My ears were ringing. And I just felt like so much energy moving through my body in that moment. And I made a decision that in that moment, I believed that it's so fun doing things we're not supposed to do. And that was something that was an imprint onto my psyche ever since. Fast forward, I'm in high school. I'm about 16 years old, and I have my first boyfriend, my first love of my life, and we become each other's first sex partners. And, I've never had sex before, but about 3 times in, I remember thinking to myself, is this it? And I was, refusing to give up. I was like, let's be creative here. So I, suggested that we dress up and pretend we're different people or tie each other up. Or I'd say during sex, just slap me. And my boyfriend he was very sweet. He was willing to comply because he was 16 years old and he was just happy to have sex at all. But one day he asked me, why do you need all of this weird shit? And I didn't know why, because it wasn't something my girlfriends were talking about. It wasn't something that I heard about in sex education. And I just remember thinking there just has to be more. I just know there's something more here. Fast forward again, and I'm living in Tokyo. It's 2002. And I am there as a DJ, and I get invited to start DJing at fetish parties. And similar to you, Christina, I was also really freaked out and intimidated by the idea of BDSM and kink. I saw Pulp Fiction, and there's a scene where they say, "Bring out the gimp," and then the guy's in head to toe leather, and they're engaging in unconsensual acts that are also really violent, whips, chains, all of that sort of stuff. And I was like, no, thank you. That's not something that, looks enticing to me. But I decided to go ahead and do this DJing gig. And what I had experienced was just like a whole new world that completely blew my mind. You know, I was seeing these beautiful people dressed up in these elaborate costumes that varied from leather and lace and latex and all of these different sort of styles. And I was noticing that these people were engaging in these really creative scenarios. And I was just fascinated by it. And furthermore, the people there, they were just so welcoming and so nice and very respectful and just willing to answer all my questions and wanting to educate and wanting to help me understand this world better. So I was completely captivated, and I was so curious on what it is about our desires and fantasies that makes us who we are. Like, where do they come from? Why does one person like being spanked while the other one wants to be the spanker, you know? And I met women who were professional dominatrixes who took me under their wing and showed me the ropes, so to speak. And I started learning myself, like, wow, this is something that can be so much more than a slap and a tickle. This is actually me creating a safe space for someone to be their most authentic selves and to show a side of themselves that they don't show anyone else, not their partners or their families or their friends. And they get to really be fully expressed and witnessed and not only accepted for who they are, but celebrated for who they are. And that alone can be so nourishing to a person. So I went back to school and studied somatic therapy. I studied tantra. I studied, energetics and somatic healing and all of these sort of different things. And that sort of brought me to where we are today, basically, just being a dealer of Eros energy and helping people release a little bit of their shame and to feel into what's possible in their erotic lives.
What a fascinating journey that you've been on. You do need to write a book. You definitely need, we definitely need the book of this. So there's a healing aspect and there's a therapeutic aspect to kink and BDSM. And there's also then the playful portion of it. It's like where you're with your partner. What is like, I think when I first, like if you look back at my Google searches when I was first discovering kink, I was in a query around, are some of these kinks that we're supposed to heal beyond? Like, is it, I like the idea, like we're universally kinky and there's a lot to dive into it, but can sometimes, is sometimes the objective to like, because I've actually asked somebody before, like, where do kinks come from? And someone had mentioned, well, trauma. I had trauma in my birth. And so is the idea to then move past it and evolve, or to play through it? And then last, I'm adding multiple questions, I realize, into this. But you're a practitioner of it, and then you also teach couples to do this work together. Is that also separate? Is it something that you're in the bedroom with your significant other and you guys are doing this work together? Because if I know some couples out there, if their partner was like, I need to book a session with a pro dom, that would create a rift inside of their relationship.
Yeah, it can. And I think it's important to just give an orientation around the definition that I use for kink, which is inspired by Jaya Ma's definition from the Erotic Blueprints, who you mentioned earlier. And kink is being turned on by what's considered to be taboo, not just the personal perspective of what's taboo, but also the societal perspective. So if your religion or your culture or the society you dwell in considers these activities that are taboo, but you still get turned on by them, that's being considered kinky. And that means that kinky for one person could be literally dirty talk, while for another it could be doggy style, while for another it's, multiple partners. So like that can be really varied from person to person. And people get really curious, like, where do kinks come from? And there is this sort of consensus around our kinks and fantasies and stuff coming from trauma. And in my 23 years of being in this world and practicing with thousands and thousands of clients, I feel like using terminology like trauma is a blanket statement that doesn't really justify and doesn't give the full picture. So what I like to say, and what I ask my clients when I'm working with them, I get curious around what have been some of your initial impressions around sex, intimacy, relationships, etc. Because usually it's those impressions, which is a different terminology as opposed to trauma. What has those impressions been around what you've seen those topics to be, and that could be anything from growing up in a religious background and being told that sex is wrong before marriage or it's a sin, to it could be something as innocent as, someone who's a baby and is, has a single mother who's actually really busy, and she maybe sets him down on the ground while he's playing with his toys and he's at foot level with her. So he's seeing her feet all the time and is associating feet with love and nurturing. So there's no trauma in that. And there certainly isn't anything that needs to be worked through, but it could be an impression, just like me sitting on the couch next to my mother saying that I shouldn't be watching violent sex on TV and thinking to myself, I fucking love doing things I shouldn't be doing. It turns me on to do things I shouldn't be doing. And that's something to kind of take note of, is like, what are the impressions you have around these subjects as you were developing as a child? Because that's an impressionable age of like really figuring out what are going to be my belief systems around desires and sexuality. And then there's also, an idea that perhaps sometimes our fantasies and desires are a way of meeting the needs that we had as children. And there's a way that we've eroticized them so that we can meet them as adults. And it's sort of this like indirect way of meeting these certain places that maybe didn't feel fully seen or fully taken care of as we were growing up. So the human psyche, the brain is such a mystical, like mysterious sort of thing. It could be so many different aspects, but yeah, I don't like to ascribe to the consensus that it's from trauma, period. Like that seems like a really black and white way of looking at something that's way more complex and nuanced than that. And for couples and individuals that want to explore this and feel a little concerned about, their own mental health and if it's normal or okay for that, I always like to ask, if you feel like you have shame around your desires, or you feel badly about yourself after you engage in them, or you feel like there's a way that it is standing in the way of true intimacy, there might be a benefit in getting some additional support from an intimacy coach or from a sex therapist who can help navigate those waters, because it's really hard to talk about sex without talking about shame. It just kind of is par for the course. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier, not many of us have come unscathed into adulthood without having some sort of hangups around sexuality. We're sort of ingrained with it since birth. So that tends to show up in relationships, and getting curious around what are the fears? Are they real fears? And what's on the other side of that fear tends to be a lot of pleasure, a lot of expansion, and a lot of possibility.
So if I know that in your private practice, you've had, people will come to you with some type of challenge or some type of feeling within their life, and then you take them on a journey that ends up them having some type of epiphany or realization or change or healing experience. Can you share about some of the transformations that you've seen that were like, whoa, like I didn't even know that was possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I have people coming for all kinds of reasons, even, everything from just being curious and wanting a safe place to explore to sexual trauma and abuse, that they want to see if they can reclaim their bodies again and reclaim their desires. So there's a wide spectrum of what this can look like. And one of my most memorable clients was a woman that came to see me. She was an interior designer, and she had not had an orgasm for, gosh, I guess it was like 10 or 15 years. And she had a loving partner. She had seen a sex therapist. She had all the bells and whistles, vibrators, dildos, you name it. Like, she had all the tools that you could possibly have, and still was not able to have climax. And she came to me because she also is really interested in power dynamics and had some fantasies around being dominated and feeling like she's never been taken through an experience where she could completely surrender to another person, not even her partner, not because he didn't love her and she didn't love him, just because he wasn't skilled or experienced in taking somebody through that kind of process. So she came to see me, and I take my clients through an intake process before we start playing. So there's this whole process that we sit down, I get to know what are their desires, what are their boundaries, and then I want to get a little information around their sexual history and get a clearer picture of who this person is so that I can meet them the best way possible. We're starting to talk about what she's interested in. She likes impact play. She likes being tied up. She wants to feel dominated and held by another person. She doesn't want to be humiliated. She wants to be praised. She's giving me all of this information. And I ask her, similar to what I said earlier, well, tell me what some of the impressions that you had around sexuality. Do you remember when you first started discovering your body and when you first started masturbating, and what was that like? And she told me a story that when she was about 3 or 4 years old, she discovered that if she were to straddle pillows and started rubbing her crotch against them, she would feel really good. And she was like, oh, I like this. I'm going to do this over and over again. Like, smart kid, right? Like, great. You discovered, your pleasure button. And she would rub herself against pillows in order to have an orgasm. However, she grew up in a really religious household. And so if her mother ever caught her masturbating, she would be, scolded and punished and sometimes spanked. So she was, physically punished, and then she was rejected for these things. And she would keep trying to sustain this pleasure by finding moments where she was hoping she wouldn't get caught. But, 3, 4 years old, it's not easy for a kid to kind of hide that sort of thing. So she would get caught a lot. And eventually she learned that her pleasure was dangerous. And so she stopped trying to masturbate because she didn't want to be rejected by her caregiver. So fast forward, she's struggling to have an orgasm, and she's giving me this information that I'm like, I got to lock this into the back of my mind because I feel like there's something really juicy here. And this is an opportunity. So we create the scene. I find out what is her yeses and her nos. And eventually when we start doing the actual conscious kink journey, as I call them, I'm taking her through this experience where, again, I'm tying her up. We're doing impact play, sensation play. We're doing everything from dirty talk and attunement. And as the scene is continuing to build, and as we start reaching closer and closer towards the end of the scene where it's the natural arc to start an escalation, I essentially tie her at the end of a 4-poster bed. She's kneeling at the end of it, and I tie her knees apart. I tie one wrist to each post. So she's sort of in an X position, and I start shoving pillows underneath her legs. And I can see her eyes get really big, like, whoa, like what's going on here? And so she doesn't say anything. I'm just shoving pillows under her. And I look her in the eyes and I say, I want you to ride those pillows right in front of me. And so hesitantly, she starts, moving her body up and down. She's tied in every direction, so she can't move too much, but she's rubbing herself up and down on these pillows. And I said, I want you to hear this as you do it. I want you to know you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, that your pleasure is your birthright. You have every right to feel this way. It is your, it is a pleasure to see you in pleasure. You're so beautiful when you're orgasmic. And I'm giving her more and more positive affirmations, and she's starting to get more and more excited. And it's building more and more. And eventually she starts to have these orgasms, not just genitally focused orgasms, but her full body orgasms. And she's just orgasming repeatedly over and over and over again until we start to bring the scene to a close. And as I'm holding her in my arms, and she's just sort of like, energy's still moving through her body. So there's moments where she's sort of like, is shivering and moving in my arms. And she's just telling me like, wow, like I have never felt so beautiful. I've never felt so safe. I never felt so seen. I feel like you repaired a part of my life, and somehow that this is all going to be okay. And from that session moving forward, she never had a problem having an orgasm ever again.
Wow. Wow. Where in doing this work, there's so much creativity that comes out of you. I hear there's talk about like sub-state and dom states that you enter into. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because it sounds like in that experience that both of you were in that heightened state. And I've heard from some subs like, wow, that it was so creative. Where did that come from inside of you? Can you speak to these almost psychedelic states that you enter in through these experiences?
Absolutely. I talk about the drug in those sort of erotic settings is the eros energy, and that erotic sexual energy goes beyond just sexuality, but is part of our life force energy and our creativity and all of these sort of beautiful things. And people who drop into the subspace and dom space, they're having chemicals released into their bodies, and they're reaching these expansive euphoric states that could be compared to MDMA or psychedelics on a lot of levels. However, because of the absence of the plant, there's a way that you have to rely on the partnership and the relationship that's happening in the erotic setting. And it's interesting because most of our trauma happens in our relational experiences. So if that is the case, then having positive relational experiences are important for healing and for self-connection again. It's been proven neurologically that our brain can't be rewired without human contact. It doesn't really happen in a vacuum or through a book. So there's this element of dropping into these expansive states that are chemical, but I think there's also a spiritual aspect to this work that is really important to note. While my clients might be submissive and becoming my follower, I'm actually subbing to the divine and to source that is downloading information and inspiration on how to meet each and every client so that I can best serve them. And when I get into those sort of states of expansion, I feel like I'm a vessel for that truth and for that energy to flow through me so that I can really show up for my partners in ways that's going to help them love themselves more and have connection to more of their truth and what's really possible once we clear away all the bullshit that we've been taught and programmed since we were little kids, and being able to really reemerge from an erotic setting afresh and anew. And really more access to who we truly are, and to remember that we have everything that we already need. I love psychedelics and plant medicines. I'm so grateful for them. They have really opened the door for so many people. And it's really also important to note that it's important to open our own doors and to have the access and the knowing that we have an ability to open our own doors at any moment. And that's something that's really empowering for people to remember. So while this can be really pleasurable and really fun and really, sort of exciting kind of experiences, it can also be really transformational and really transcendental for a lot of people as well.
So it's interesting because when you work privately with a client, they're coming to you and there's an exchange happening. And you also teach groups of students. And when we're out in the world and we're connecting, not in the, practitioner student way and we're having these erotic experiences together, attachment comes alive. And I imagine, I know that to me, when I play in the kink space, it goes, there's like maybe for me personally, it's like expansion. It's going into these new levels and these new realms that feel very vulnerable and very intimate. What guidelines would you give maybe two people coming together for the first time that aren't in that exchange? Because I could also see why you are there is some type of exchange. There must be students who are falling in love with you through that experience. So how would you, if somebody out in the world wanted to find a partner or wanted to create that with another individual that maybe they hadn't, they're new to each other. They haven't, developed a place where they're entering in some type of committed relationship. How would they prep for something like that?
Such a good question, because, it's a common question for people to get curious around how can they find partners to explore in this way with. And then another really popular question is, I have a partner, but how do I, breach these subjects? And how do I introduce this idea of exploring at this depth and at this level, and these can be really tricky things because, like I said before, it's hard to talk about sexuality without talking about shame. There's a lot of people that have undergone their own sort of, repression or obstacles or trauma or whatnot around sexuality. So being really clear that this is a process that takes a lot of time and energy, but also like at a pace that feels really best for you and your partner. It's funny, back in the day when I wanted to kind of gauge if someone I wasn't always out as a dominatrix. So let me just start off by saying that. And if I was trying to gauge if someone was kinky, I would do it in these really indirect ways and just say like, oh, hey, have you read 50 Shades of Grey? It's like about kink or whatever, I guess. And it's I think it might be interesting, but I don't know. Is that something you would ever, talk about or read and see what their response is to it? And nowadays I'm like, encouraging couples and I myself, like wanting to let people know like, hey, I would really love to create a time or maybe even a date where we're going to actually bring focus around sharing what we desire in the bedroom and what sort of explorations we'd like to embark on. Because I would love to know more about you on this level. And I really want to be known at this level by you and have that kind of intimacy. Are you available for those kinds of conversations and that kind of exploration? And seeing if that person is like available and really giving them an opportunity to be mentally prepared for conversations like that, as opposed to, midway through sex, you slap your partner in the face or you start choking them. That can be really like confusing for certain people. So really like ensuring that you're investing in your own education and your own experiences. We're in an information era where there's a lot of availability to learning about yourself in this way, whether you're partnered or not. But when you start expounding your own understanding of your own desires and your own boundaries, I truly believe that it creates an energy field to attract more of what you are and what you put your focus on. What we have attention on tends to flourish and grow. So investing in your own erotic journey, noticing if you have any hangups, if you have any sort of unconscious shadows that need to be cleared around your life as a whole, but around your sexuality, so you can create an environment where those conversations can be had and you can actually welcome a partner that's going to feel safe with you and feel excited by exploring those sort of things with you. And, don't forget, there's WeDeepen, there's me, there's like Francesca. There are so many support systems that are there that I just want people to know that you don't have to do this by yourself. And sex education is dismal in this country. If you were lucky enough to even get sex education, you probably learned how not to get pregnant and how not to get STDs, and probably didn't learn a lot about what do you truly desire and how can you communicate that in a way that gets your partner to meet you in that way and feel excited about it. So, we want to just like acknowledge that we were all kind of raised in this same boat. We're all in this together. And there are people there that are willing and excited and passionate about supporting you on that path as well.
I remember, a decade ago in New York City, riding the subway stations, and everybody was reading 50 Shades of Grey. That book was spreading around the town. And prior to that, I was in a new relationship. I'd started seeing my best guy friend. He was like my go-to after healing from a 5-year relationship, and we're hanging out all the time, and we transitioned into this intimate connection. And one morning we woke up, and he was like, and he said, in the spirit of being fully transparent and authentic with one another, there's something I want to tell you. And I remember I had somewhere to be that day, and I was making breakfast, and he came back and reminded me. He's like, remember, I have something that I want to show and tell you about. And I kept thinking in my head, like, I don't think he's going to say, I love you. This is probably too soon for that. And, in my early 30-something-year-old mind. And so we're about to walk up there, and he's like, come, I want to show you something. So he opened up the computer, and there was a YouTube video that he had pulled up, and it was a BDSM scene. There was a gag ball in the mouth, and that blindfold, someone spanking the other. And prior to that, he had taped my arms together once in the back. He was also the first person. He's been the only person who's been able to penetrate me anally in a very thoughtful manner, and that actually had felt good. So I knew there was something key about it, but I'd never even heard the term BDSM. Again, this is before 50 Shades of Grey. And so he showed me this video, and we're rushing out the door, and I was like, okay, interesting, fascinating. We got into the elevator, and I was like, where did this come from? Like, where is this? And he said, well, when I was in kindergarten, I had fantasies about tying up my teacher. And this has been the space that I love to play in. So he was the first person that I started to dive into this world. And then our relationship quickly from that moment took a U-turn out because there was some underneath of lies and inconsistencies. And I soon realized that we were better friends. We actually had started studying Kabbalah. We got into a big argument one night around what love was. We couldn't agree. And this actually circles around to actually the topic I wanted to go. We couldn't agree on what love was. And after that argument, I went home that night. And again, this is all happening around the same time. I've seen the video. We go out to dinner. He's saying there's two types of people in the world. There's givers and takers. And I'm thinking, I think there's something more here than just judging people as you're either giver or taker. Because I knew at the end of that meal that we were having that the bill was going to come, and knowing him, he was going to pay for the bill. And so there's something that just seemed off in our discussion. I went home that night, and on my mantle was a Kabbalah book on love. It's called Kabbalah on Love. And I'd had that book for about 2 years since going to an Intro to Kabbalah class. And I pick up the book and I start reading it. And I'm like, yes, this is everything that I feel about love. And they're putting it in words that I've never heard it spoke before. Him and I ended up going and studying Kabbalah together. We uncoupled during that class and learned to become best friends again. But that was the end of my BDSM journey up until in this past recent year. But in that book, which has always stuck with me, and if you listen to this podcast, you hear me talk about love in this way over and over and over. But how they describe it, it's this gradual process of removing layers of the ego, becoming more and more authentically yourself, coupled with ever increasing acts of sharing, because we give to who we love. And I found for me in my expansion and opening into this level of intimacy, it's really deep. And I am playing in that love realm. I'm playing in the sense of like, oh, this is really turns you on, and I'm getting to see more authentically of who you are, and it's getting to bring another side of me out that I wasn't aware of and didn't know existed. And in that experience, there's a real deep sharing, and so the lust necessarily isn't. I'm really moving from a place of love. So my question for you is, as kind of even going back to the question I started to ask before, is as people are coming into that space, it's so intimate and it's so deep. And some people might be coming into it from a place of lust. Like, I like the primal, I want to feel connection. And somebody else might coming from like, I want to feel opening to God and a soulmate type connection. And there's some type of dissonance that's happening in that moment. And I know you speak about aftercare, which I love to go into, and also attuning to a partner beforehand. And I imagine those, having those deeper conversations are really important. But how would you suggest that someone care for their own mental health and their own attachment, and you teach attachment too, with inside of these experiences?
Well, thank you for sharing about the definition of love, or what is love. And it's interesting because I talk about the difference between romance versus true depth and intimacy. And I always laugh that, like, fuck the flowers and candy, like, save it. Like, I want to be able to tell you my most private, deepest fantasy. And if you not only accept it, but are like, how can we make that happen? I feel like that's probably the most romantic gesture that's possible. And I just love that idea of like, what is true depth and intimacy. And when people are coming into a partnership or into an encounter or an engagement of some kind, getting really clear on, what are the intentions here? There's an acronym, you've heard of BDSM, but there is something called RBDSM, right? And RBDSM stands for relationship agreements, boundaries, desires, safety, and meaning. And the M for meaning is actually a really important thing to cover, because it gets curious around by engaging with me in this way, what does that hold? What meaning does that hold for you? And I want to just be clear, because I don't like operating within hidden expectations or agendas, and really wanting to come into this as a clean slate and as an open person to seeing whatever arises organically from it. So wanting to get really clear on, what does this mean for you? And if this is an act of love, and if this is something that afterwards you're going to sort of have an expectation around having deeper relationships and want to see me more and want to get engaged. Who knows? Like, it could be any of these things. That's information I want to know up front before I get involved, because I might be more into it for the physical exploration of it, or even like the mental and emotional exploration of it. But I can keep that exploration exclusive from love. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied together, even if I'm in my heart the whole time, which I like to only play in my heart. And I don't really like doing things if people don't have their heart in it. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's an expectation for commitment or that it has to look a certain way. So perhaps, there can be a holding of, you can have your experience and I can love and accept you for what you're bringing to the table, and you can love and accept where I'm at. And does that feel good for us to still join together if we're mutually respective of like what our truths are and what our expectations are in that dynamic? So getting all of those conversations out of the way is important. I have something called the Kink checklist, which is sort of a beginner type of list where people can go through the list of possibilities of what to explore as far as, I like bondage, I like spanking, like I like this, I like that. However, a bigger conversation that I have right now that I'm building is really taking these concepts and going much deeper into like, okay, so you like spanking. Do you know why you like spanking? And what does spanking mean to you? Like Christina, I might tell you I like spanking. And you might think to yourself like, well, cool. I would love to have you dressed up like a naughty schoolgirl, and I'm going to put you across my lap and spank you and tell you you've been naughty. But for me, I might like spanking as a very tantric engagement where I want to feel like you're spanking my ass, which is my first chakra, as a way of activating my access to security, wealth, and trust. And that might be a way that I want to engage in that with you as well. So not only just talking about expectations and safety and desires and boundaries, but taking all of this, like all of it on the surface level and diving so much deeper into it. And the benefit of that doesn't have to be necessarily a commitment or deeper understanding of your partner, but it really is a deeper understanding of yourself, because whoever you're engaged with is going to be your mirror anyway. So if you look at everybody as an opportunity to learn from, whether there's going to be a long-term commitment or not, you can just benefit so much more. And I feel like it brings an energy of, of humanity to it that I think that people don't always take into consideration.
So what have you learned personally about yourself through this journey and how you intimately relate to your partners? Like, how has your relational journey been affected by your work, been affected by your studies?
That's such a good question. I've got so many benefits from not just the work that I'm doing, but every person I'm, lucky enough to have been able to be maybe a small part of their experience and them of mine. One of the things that, is a reoccurring theme in kink and also in my life is just taking a look at the power dynamics that are always at play, because there's always a power dynamic at all times. And that doesn't necessarily doesn't have to necessarily be a relational component of, you're leading this podcast interview and you're essentially the authority of this dynamic at this moment, which I love. Like, you could dom me all day if you want. But what's interesting is that really embracing the idea that power boils down to not control, but to choice. And when we have consciousness, we have more access to choice. So I can choose when I want to surrender my power, when I want to submit to somebody. And that makes me just as powerful as the one that's assuming that power. Giving power away isn't a form of weakness. It's actually surrendering power and not being power over, but power with. So the idea of what we believe as a society is of what is power, what is leadership, all of those sort of like Western ideals have been completely turned on their head for me over the last 23 years. And the idea of power is really, I feel like, consciousness at the end of the day, because through consciousness, you're able to respond to things and not react to things. And you're able to have agency, and you're able to really be moving from the self, capital S, as opposed to moving from trauma or moving from, conditioning or whatever else you can think of. So I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned by being in these spaces and working in power dynamics for so long, is just really, what does power mean? And what kind of leader are you? Because that's an important question that everyone should ask themselves.
Oftentimes I find myself triggered when people will say, take your power back. Because power seems like an energetic that's never really, it's never really gone. You always have power, but I like how you're saying this idea of playing with power, and that two people can play in that dynamic of it. Who's creating the container? Whose house are you at? Because there's even two power dynamics. Yes, I'm hosting this podcast, but I'm also at your home. So there's a power that you have. So now we're kind of dancing within that power dynamic. But what would you say? Yeah, you nod at your head when I said of getting triggered by take your power back, Christina, or that term. And I'm like, I don't think you ever lost your power. You never stop giving where people say, stop giving your power away.
Totally. I love that because, sometimes I often think about when people are talking about the masculine and feminine energies, and I'm not saying that on a gender base, but I'm just talking about on an energetic base. If, people tend to associate dominance and power with the masculine and surrender and submission with the feminine. However, that's not true. Just like with all humans, we all hold our feminine and masculine energies within ourselves. Same goes for those that are entering into a dominant state or a submissive state. I can be dominant and in my feminine, as opposed to having to be dominant and only able to be in my masculine, and wanting to kind of shed light on power looks different in so many different ways, and that it doesn't have this one sort of attitude that I think mostly I think the Western world has considered what power is, which is force and which is winning and which is all of these sort of things. And it's so much more nuanced and complex, and can go so deep into each person's individual experience. So, it's really fun to kind of play with those ideas a bit more.
So Kimi Inch, you're in a relationship. Yes. What is it like to be in a relationship with you? I mean, are you two do you BDSM in your own relationship? What is it like?
It's great. I'm a dominatrix and a comedian all in one, and I'll spank you and make you laugh at the same time. Let's see. Would I date me though? No, I would not.
I don't believe you.
Yeah. So, I would date me for my dominant skills because, as a dom, it can be difficult to find. Well, not just as a dom. Let me start over. Not just as a dom, but as someone who's dedicated her entire life to tantra, kink, the erotic, etc., and have really dived into some really deep places with it. It can sometimes feel daunting to find a partner that either has that experience or is really available and open to going there with you at that level. And so that can create a little difficulty. So often I'm teaching my students on how to dive deeper into these subjects and how to become the erotic leaders of their own lives. And they're like, I feel like it's going to be harder now to find a partner. And I'm like, that might be true, but you're going to weed out a lot of the bullshit because you really don't want to date the guy that's like, you're a dominatrix. You wouldn't dominate me. Fuck that shit. You're never going to spank me, and things like that sort of energy, isn't going to be something that would be interesting to you anyway. But, as I have been evolving in my own life path, I've been, getting really curious around how love, how relationships, how that dynamic has been evolving me. My partner is what I like to call a dom tamer. You might have heard of a brat tamer before, but a dom tamer is basically a person, a very dominant person who is so skilled and attuned that he is able to dom other doms. So a dom tamer is kind of like one of these really rare people that you find that has enough confidence and skill and experience to be able to dom a dom, essentially, which can be really hard and intimidating for people. So dom tamers is basically a phrase that I like to use. Have you heard of dom tamer before?
I haven't heard of dom tamer, but I've heard therapist for therapist. Yes. So sounds very similar. So you met okay, keep going.
Yeah. So I met this man through Tinder, and I was just curious on testing out the Austin, experience in dating, because moving from New York City, I was like, oh, this is the worst. It can't be worse than New York. And I met this man on Tinder, and he just really blew me away because he was super interested in making a positive impact on the world as well, which was something that I was really looking for, that kind of partnership. And he was very open to kink, even though he didn't have any formal training. And on our third date, he attended one of my workshops because I needed to see, can this guy hang? We hadn't even had sex yet, but I wanted to see how the workshop was for him. And he was like, oh, this is great. I love this. And, he just really kind of tapped into his own natural dominant powers, and just sort of elevated it all with some more technique and depth and understanding of himself and what power actually is. And as a dominant woman, and women say this all the time, like, I don't want to have to handhold my partner and teach them how to dominate me. That kind of takes the fun out of it. So being able to actually surrender, has been such an expansive experience for me, because I had realized as a dominatrix and as a person that tends to be in the dominant role, surrender was something that it was really elusive for me. So being able to experience it firsthand in the relationship erotically, and then beyond the erotic world, just being in relationship with another human who you can't control and has a mind of their own, and really like understanding like, oh, the power dynamics within our own relationship and within our own selves is really interesting. I used to think that, I've noticed that there's a lot of DS relationships, and I'm not in a DS relationship. So a dominant submissive relationship is a 24-hour contract around, maintaining those dynamics in all aspects of your life. So I don't do that personally, but there can be a lot of codependency in these sort of dominant submissive dynamics, where essentially the dom may be using the submissive person in order to feel powerful, because they don't normally feel powerful in a lot of the areas of their life, while the submissive person might be using the dom in order to feel a sense of self-worth or value of some kind. And I notice, like, when we start to really heal and transform through our own healing work and our own deep inner work, we start to, have more balance within ourselves, that we don't actually need other people to fill that void. As a dominant woman, I don't need people to submit to me. In order to feel powerful. What I'm more interested in is, if anything, not doing a bunch of shit to my partner, but actually helping them feel themselves more, and helping them love themselves more, and helping them see, what is their truth. That's the kind of experience I want to lead my partners through, not to have them feel subjugated, but to help them feel inspired. That's the kind of domination that I like to be involved in. So in my relationships, that's kind of where I started to soften into these concepts around what this looks like in my partnership, and to move from codependency into a situation where I feel like we come together as equals, and instead of spending energy trying to fill each other's emptiness, we already come in full. So it's like, how do we build on the foundation that's here? Because we have a foundation to build upon, and what do we want to build, and how far and how high do we want to take it? So we're still kind of figuring that out as we go, but it's an amazing journey. And, I think relationships is the deepest healing work that you can possibly do. I've seen you shake your head. You can relate, can't you?
I can totally relate. And you met him on Tinder. How random. How many years ago was this? 4 years ago. Wow. Shout out to Tinder. Surprise, surprise. You never know where it's going to happen. The universe works in mysterious ways. So you have a program coming up, a live event here in Austin, Texas, that's worth traveling for if you live in another state elsewhere. I don't think you're going to get this type of program in Milwaukee. So come to Austin. It's a great place to visit. Make it a trip and a destination. And it's a 4-day immersive experience. Can you share about what will happen within those 4 days?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a 4-day invitation of really diving deep into your desires and really understanding yourself on that kind of level. It starts on a Thursday evening, and the opening night is about really building the foundation and the container, but we also offer our participants to view what a conscious kink journey could actually look like. And we take them through this process that they witness a scene between me and one of my angels, Tiana, and they can witness me taking her through impact play, bondage, dirty talk, attunement, energetic sex, all of these sort of different things. And then after that demonstration is over, I basically say, all right, buckle up, because this is what we're going to be doing over the next remaining 3 days. And basically people are taught how to communicate their desires, how to get their needs met in the bedroom, what is their erotic blueprint, and really diving into not only their blueprint, but all the blueprints, and having a visceral experience of those different blueprints, plus learning impact play, shibari, having their own private play party that is full of their not only classmates, but past students, so that we have the highest caliber of attendance, that people who have been educated, who are conscious, that are beautiful, and who are heart-centered in that space. And then we end it all with a beautiful closing ceremony that includes aftercare and a gratitude circle. And it is such a beautiful experience of 4 days that is sexy and fun and safe and loving. And people are just blown away that there can be so much that can happen in a 4-day period, but we go real deep, and it's just such a fun experience. So yeah, it's something that we do in Austin. I only do it maybe once a quarter, and we always sell out. I only have, maybe 10 tickets left. So I would love to see you there, Christina. I'd love to see anyone listening there. And we vet everyone that comes. So if you sign up for a ticket, I'll just jump on a quick phone call and make sure it feels like a good fit. So again, we can just ensure really positive, good energy in the space.
It sounds like a great experience for a couple to come in and do it together. What about someone who's currently single? That's really vulnerable to come into a space by themselves.
So true. And we want to make sure that those who are attending get the experience that they are ready for and looking for. So if you don't have a partner, we have the other classmates that you can participate in some of the exercises with, or we have a bunch of angels. I call them angels because they're really well educated and have worked with me for several years. But I have men and women who assist, called angels, that you could also participate in the experientials and the exercises with, so that we want to ensure that, again, that you get out of everything that you want in this experience. And most people that come that are single, oh my gosh, they learn so much, not just from the other classmates, but they learn so much about themselves because they actually make it about them and not worried about, is my partner okay? Like, they get to really be selfish in the best possible way. Like, they really get to make it all about them. And we all conspire, in order to make it all about the individual experience. So whether you're single or in a partnership, we've got you covered, and you get to have the experience that you want to have.
So there's only 10 spots left more.
So it's 20 spots total.
20 spots total, only 10. When's going to be the next one if someone misses this one?
We're going to have 2 dates in February. We'll have a weekend before February 14th and the weekend after February 14th. I can't remember the dates off the top of my head, but we usually do 2 back-to-back events in February. Those are also really, last time I posted about that, they sold out in about 2 weeks. So it was a really fast sell. And yeah, it's one of those things, like, if this is enticing, and you're not so sure, reach out to me. I'm happy to jump on a quick phone call and share more information, because sometimes that hesitation is just a lack of information. And we want to make sure you can make an enthusiastic, informed decision. I
know we're coming close to the end of this podcast. However, I also need to ask about the industry. I recently had Rebecca Gordon, who's a well-known New York City astrologist, and she's been doing her work for about 20 years. And, we kind of all got into this or she started in 2006, and we've seen this massive growth within the transformational industry, our curiosity around self-expansion. If somebody is now younger and they're curious about embarking on a career in kink or as an educator, what would you tell, because you're saying your programs are sold out. There must be an amazing opportunity for somebody who wants to get into this work. Where should they go?
It's a really good question, because as the intimacy world is beginning to expand, it's important that people are investing in their education, because it's such a vulnerable industry to get into. There's a lot of sensitivity and trauma and things to navigate. So investing in your education is the first and foremost step if this is an industry that you want to get involved in. And knowing that as you're going through that process of learning, that it's also evolving you as well. So there's so much benefit to that. Also, I like to tell people, as much as I love this work, it's actually very challenging. You know, I was sharing with you at another point that, you know, it's hard to post on social media. My posts get taken down. I have to be really careful with the payment processors that I use. I have to be really careful in my emails, like my wording, all of that sort of stuff can be easily not only scrutinized, but there's ways that I can be canceled in so many levels. So I like to tell people, like, if you're interested in getting into this, you really got to love it, because doing it just for the money is not going to be sustainable. And maybe you can say that about a lot of industries, but I think it's really interesting because this is an industry where, you know, one day you're getting dick pics because they think you're an intimacy coach and that's okay. And the next day you're getting hate mail from religious groups. And then the next day somebody's like, you saved my life because I've never been able to be comfortable with my own sexuality and my own desires and fantasies. Like, it's a freaking emotional roller coaster. So I really urge people, take your education seriously, do a lot of research around the educators that you want and the mentors you want to work with. But mentorship is really important. Working with clients with supervision and with support is really important. And just being really diligent on being self-connected and learning how to ground and being trauma informed and all of these sort of things are really important as well. I do courses online and in person that help people learn, and I'm developing a certification course as well. So that's exciting. That's down the road in 2024. But yeah, reach out to me and feel free to like research on who other educators are, because mentorship is going to be a big, important part of that development if you're interested in being an intimacy coach and dipping your toes into this world.
I love that hearing around you scaling and nearly reaching capacity at the same time. Like it's going so well for you, and many people are benefiting, and the testimonials are phenomenal. What is the future for you? What does the future of Kimi Inch look like?
Yeah, so as I've been doing this work for 23 years, one day, somebody had asked me a question, and they said, you know, do you want to change a person's world or do you want to change the world? And I said, I want to change the world. And that acknowledgement led me to know that this is something that is bigger than just the Kimi Inch show, and that I want to create a platform and a safe place for people to expand their erotic intelligence and have a place where they can have community and interactions that are supportive in that. And while taking these classes and workshops are great, the actual most transformative healing part of the work is being in community as you do it. So wanting to create community is a big part of the next steps and the next vision. So I am creating an online community that's going to be free called The Playroom, where we're going to offer people an opportunity to be with like-minded pleasure seekers like themselves in a conscious space, in a place where people want to expand and want to, you know, evolve erotically. So that is really the biggest vision, is like, how do we make a greater impact in the world? How do we create an opportunity for people to have safe and sacred experiences so that when they go out into the world, they affect the many other people they come into contact with. Sometimes I don't think our little brains can even really fathom just how important our own healing work and our transformational work is, but it really is how we change the world, is from the inside out, and wanting to cultivate places where people can have support during that process, I think is really important, and to have fun while we're doing it. You know, everybody's so attached to the blood, sweat, and tears of it all. But I think it can all be done with grace, ease, and elegance. And that's really my mantra, is grace, ease, and elegance. So, yeah, that's really the direction for me and the company, is not just the Kimi Inch show, but again, what my brand and my company is called, and more, and inviting other facilitators and people to sort of talk more about these subjects in a place that feels safe and supportive.
You say I'm so cool. You're so cool. You're so inspiring. Thank you so much for all that you do in the world, and for being one of my new teachers and friends. This was so enjoyable to have this dialogue with you and to share your work with those listening. I imagine this is a fascinating podcast. I will include in the description about how to discover more of Kimi's work, how to register for a program. I would love to see you there and be a part of it as well. Thank you, Kimi. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Deepen with Christina. Again, if you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, follow, rate it, give it 5 stars. Helps more people find it, helps me continue to host it. And I look forward to seeing you in real life. Let's be together. Okay, bye for now.